Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I am one of your hosts, Daryl Pace.
And I am Byron Pace.
And this week we have Ed Stafford. We've been promising for the last few weeks. We finally got it tied down. We were also away in Sky.
So we're sorry we're late.
Yeah, we're sorry we're late. If you're listening in the future, then we're not late. We're on time.
But if you're a regular listener who's waiting for your subscription to come through, normally on a Thursday, then we are a couple of days late. But it is because we wanted to get the Ed Stafford podcast out, and we were only able to record it today on the Monday. But it's going to be worth the wait. I absolutely promise that.
And we've got like podcast over podcast being recorded.
This whole week is full of podcasts.
So plenty to go on in the coming weeks.
Most of you will probably know who Ed Stafford is already. You get a full rundown of his sort of list of achievements, but he's a modern day adventurer and explorer. He's got a new book out called Adventures for a Lifetime, and he was the first person to ever walk the length of the Amazon. But you're going to hear all about that in this podcast. Fascinating man, very humorous as well at times, and someone that I've personally taken a lot of inspiration from over the last sort of 10 years that he's been exploring and doing awesome things around the planet.
Indeed. We have been on Sky last week, like I mentioned, and we were doing all things whiskey.
We were.
And gin.
Gin and whiskey. It's been a while since you've been there back recently, but there was a period where I was going like 3 or 4 times a year.
It was more pleasurable this time than earlier in the year. It was literally tourist hell when we went. When I went in summer. And then when we went a week ago, there was almost no one around.
All the tourists had vacated for the winter, which was good for us.
We've kept, in fact, no one go this time of year because we don't want you there.
No, it was great. We were only there, like actually on the island for 2 days, but two solid days. We started doing some work with Gallic whiskies,
yes,
and gin. So they've just started an Instagram page, which is Gallic whiskey. If you just search Gallic whiskey gin, that's the tag for Instagram, and the first 2 pictures from the trip are up there.
I can 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 bottles of
whiskey. We've got it lined. We're lined up in the office. Yeah. Well, I know what I'm doing for the rest of the day.
Yeah. I was going to say. What was I going to say? I was going to say something to you. Oh, competitions. Let's do the competitions.
Okay, so we have another competition. And while I explain what you can win, Daryl's going to think about how you can enter it.
Oh, I've already thought of it.
He's one step ahead of me. So we are going to give you the chance to win a CZ Firearms doormat. We've already given away 2 of these. The last time I put up a picture with my little puppy, and I might actually do it with him sitting on the doormat again because he's about twice the size he was when I took the last picture. It's been incredibly popular, although I'm a little disappointed that the last person who won didn't send us a picture with the doormat, wherever it is that they've put it in the house.
Yep. Maybe they're not allowed it in the house.
Maybe they're not allowed it in the house. So that is what you have a chance to win, a CZ doormat. We'll stick up the pictures and how you enter, Daryl's just about to tell you, on our social medias as usual.
So if you head over to our Facebook or our Instagram, it's the same. You'll see the post on the story, or you'll see it on the Facebook. And we want funny pictures of your dogs. Or if you don't own it, if you don't own a dog, then just another animal is fine.
Yeah, funny pictures. Of your dog. I like that.
Funny pictures of your dog doing, I don't know, like my dog sleeps in the most ridiculous ways every night, and just funny faces doing funny things. That's what we want. We love animals and we love dogs. So what?
I said, or you can email us.
If you don't use social media, you can also email us as well. So just send us any way you can the funny pictures, and then we'll decide.
And the one that tickles us the most, we'll have a vote in the office.
Yeah,
the one which makes us laugh the most will win the CZ doormat.
And other news, Modern Huntsman is well and truly, Volume 2, I should add, is well and truly on its way to
Did you see the picture I sent you, Daryl?
I did. We got evidential proof of the pallet being shipped from America.
Literally an entire pallet.
For the last year since we've been bringing it to the UK. It has been a little bit of a struggle, I have to say, with the postage. Not due to the Modern Huntsman guys. It's due to the incompetence of every mail person on the planet, which evidently, honestly, I don't understand the people that deliver mail or the people in between.
Apart from our postie, he's awesome.
Our postie's good, but we've known him for like 15 years. But when it's not our regular postie, they tend to leave things for the dogs to chew on, which that's happened. And also, people that deliver the parcels seem to want to kick or leave stuff on runways, or they
in the rain. That's happened.
I've never. We ship a lot of stuff, as people know, because we sell T-shirts and everything like that. And I've never known a group of people that work in that industry that are so incompetent at actually doing their job, because the amount of parcels that go missing or damaged is
very frustrating. But hopefully, we've seen the picture. It's a plastic wrapped pallet full of Volume 2s. It was already on its way last week. I sent out an email to everybody who had pre-ordered Volume 2 from us just this morning, just to give them an update. There's still a little bit of time to pre-order. Basically, until it lands, we're going to keep the pre-orders up, but after that, the price is going to go up a bit. So get your pre-order in now for Volume 2.
And we have pretty much sold out of Volume 1, but there is more coming on that shipment
there is,
as well. So just keep an eye on that, and we'll be doing some Christmas bundles, providing we don't sell out of them all before Christmas.
I'm very excited to see it. I can't wait to get it in the office and get my grubby paws on it. And in fact, we'll be having a podcast with Tyler, and possibly even the lady behind the design, who happens to be Tyler's girlfriend, because they're going to be here sometime towards the end of this month. So we'll definitely get them on a podcast to talk about Volume 2 and a whole manner of other things, I'm sure.
Yes, we will indeed. Do you have anything else, or should we let people dive straight into Ed?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think we'll let you enjoy a fantastic podcast with Ed Stafford. Ed, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today. My brother and I have been following your adventures, I think, pretty much since you finished, or just before you finished, your extremely long walk of the Amazon, which we're going to touch on today, and your adventures after, and of course your new book, Adventures for a Lifetime. But before we get to that, and because this has just happened, one of the things I love about particularly British adventurers and explorers is what an amazing community it seems to be. And I know this weekend you were with Ross Edgley as he finished what was an incredible feat. What was it like being there at the end?
Yeah. Well, hi guys. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It was a lovely weekend. It was something that I wanted to go down and show my support for, really, because I don't know Ross at all. I commented on his social media when he broke Sean Conway's record, when he'd pretty much done the full length of Britain, and he was turning the corner and coming back down the North Sea. And I commented because I was just blown away by what he had achieved. He got in contact back, and we've been chatting for the last, I suppose, month and a half, really. And so I just wanted to show a bit of solidarity, really, because swimming around Britain, especially finishing at the beginning of November, is no mean feat at all. And he was getting into the water time and time again, day after day, for 5 months. And I suppose I do feel like I'm at a stage of my career where, rather than feel any sort of jealousy or envy, I just wanted to go down and give him a big hug and say, well done, mate. I just think it's so impressive what he'd done. And, of course, he was absolutely swamped by people wanting to have a piece of him yesterday. And I didn't want to get mixed up in that, really, because that wasn't really my intention for going down. I wanted him to see my face and know that, people have recognised what he's done. People have sat up and gone, that's incredible. So just to show a bit of solidarity, really.
No, it was incredible, and having swum a lot as a youngster, I can get my head round a little bit about what would have been involved, and I don't envy him that. It looked horrendous.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was a sort of fun swim invite at the end of it, and people could swim about 400 metres out into the sea and then come back in with Ross. And I was asked if I wanted to be a part of that, and the thought of just swimming 400 metres out to sea bloody terrified me, quite frankly. So, yeah, no, incredible feat, yeah.
Now, for you, in terms of your adventure career, it really kicked off with your walk of the Amazon. But just to give people a little bit of background about where you came from, because for me personally, I always found that quite inspiring. It kind of gave me the feeling that if you put your mind to it, anything is possible for anyone. Tell people about your background just before you made that leap, having left the army to go and walk the Amazon.
Okay, I mean, I left the military and I did conservation expeditions for a number of years. Initially, as I left the army, I thought that I wanted to become a stockbroker, and I thought I was going to go and work in the city and have a high-paying job and a Porsche and probably a drug habit, and I couldn't get a job in the city, was the honest truth. I started to do the qualifications, certificate in securities. I was doing loads of networking meetings, and everyone was saying, "Look, Ed, I'm really struggling to hold on to my own job, let alone get you one." And at that time, I was just looking for a place filler, really, and there was a job on a board, basically, which was for ex-British Army officers, and it was a list of available jobs, and they were mostly estate agents and jobs that I suppose I now look at as very sort of run-of-the-mill everyday jobs. And at the bottom there was Expedition Leader Belize, and it was to take a group of gap year students, so from 18 to about 24, into the middle of the rainforest in Belize and do a conservation project with them. And I just thought, that looks absolutely amazing. And I only thought it would be 3 months until I, then came back and got a job in the city. But I think I was just blown away by the fact that there were jobs out there where you could just have such an amazing time, and it was actually doing good as well. We were doing conservation projects, and so I felt good about myself as well. And I suppose I had a little bit of an epiphany that leading expeditions and having adventures was hopefully going to be my career from then on, really. I did it for a number of years. It paid absolute peanuts. I mean, for a couple of years, I was on about 50 quid a week, which is less than the dole in the UK. And yet it didn't really matter, because when I was on the expeditions, life was free. But I did accrue a bit of debt, so I had to go and do some sort of consultancy work in Afghanistan for a while, and advised the United Nations during the first presidential elections after 9/11 and the subsequent American attack. And then I suppose I reached this phase where about 9 years after I'd started leading expeditions, I suppose I was getting slightly tired of listening to who's got what exam results and who fancies who, and I thought, you know what, I want to do something a little bit more grown up and something for myself. And I'd always had dreams of going to the Amazon, but all my rainforest experience had come from Central America or Southeast Asia. And I thought, you know what, let's look for a massive expedition I could do in the jungle in the Amazon. And I knew of, and I'd read books of. The best one that I'd read was by Joe Kane, who was a New York journalist who'd accompanied Piotr Hemilinski on a kayaking journey down the Amazon, which was called Running the Amazon. And it was amazing, and I wanted to sort of have the same sort of adventure, but I was absolutely rubbish at kayaking. And I knew there were like grade 5+ rapids going down the Apple Remac and the Colca Canyon. And so basically I thought, right, I can't kayak, why don't walk it? And I Googled lots of expeditions to try and find ones that had walked the length of the Amazon, because I wanted to learn from their post-expedition reports. And I went down to the Royal Geographical Society and again did loads of research and looking for people who'd walked the Amazon. And then the more I looked, the more it suddenly occurred to me that if I was to do this, I may well be the first person ever to do it. So I think at that point, a real spark ignited inside me, and I do think it was slightly ego-driven, but the concept of being the first person ever to do something, especially something quite so big, really, really excited me. So from then on, I never looked back, and that became an utter obsession, I suppose. Was to be that first person to walk the length of the Amazon. Yeah.
What was it like getting support for such an ambitious project? I mean, I can imagine at the time there was probably a lot of people that didn't think it was actually possible. Yeah,
I mean, there wasn't anybody, I don't think, who actually said, yeah, you'll do it, it'll be fine, apart from my family and friends. But as I've been quoted saying a number of times, they hadn't really got a clue what they were talking about. It was, I think, in my opinion, it was difficult getting support. It was difficult getting financial support, but I think most people, especially the so-called experts, got somewhat fazed by the expedition in its entirety. They looked at the whole expedition and they just thought it was too big. It was too much to do. And yet, when I broke it down into individual days, I thought, do you know what? None of those days are going to be impossible days to walk that little chunk of rainforest. And therefore, if you bolt them all together, surely it's possible. I mean, there were a few sort of I had a few strokes of luck. I'd seen this image on Google that was it seemed to be showing the extent of the floodwaters at peak flood season, because the biggest, I suppose, reason why everyone said that walking the Amazon was impossible is that there's no banks really to the Amazon. The waters rise in flood season, and the waters just cut into the rainforest, and you get this area called Varzea forest, which is flooded forest basically, and that stretches about sort of 80 to 100 kilometers either side of the main river. So they thought, you can't walk that because you'll be walking submerged in water. But anyway, this image seemed to show the extent of these flooded forests. I had been taken somehow through the jungle canopy. And so I wrote to NASA, and literally within 6 days, this bundle of CD-ROMs came through the post.
Amazing.
And sorry?
Amazing that they were just so receptive to hand over the information.
It was remarkable. And if you were to be there were so many things in this expedition that just happened, that seemed to slot into place. I saw, and I'm not a religious person at all, but so many times people went out of their way to help, or the exact nugget of information that I needed in order to do something just was presented to me. And yeah, they didn't charge anything. They sent a bundle of CD-ROMs, and suddenly I had this it was such a niche, unique project that they'd done with using refraction and satellites, and they'd looked through the jungle canopy, and I suddenly could see where the extent of the floodwaters were. Admittedly, it was data from back in 1996, but it still showed essentially the hard ground line that I needed to then annotate onto my main maps and then use in order to plan a route. And I think that information meant that, of course, every tributary has its own associated flooded forest as well, which we would then have to traverse. But it did mean that the main bulk of the flooded forest I could avoid. I could just handrail the river at a safe distance away and know that I would be walking on hard ground. And that, and I suppose the evolution of small pack rafts at the time, Alpaca, this Canadian firm that made the first pack rafts, were just coming into sort of public knowledge, and I'd used them in Patagonia on mountaineering expeditions, and just thought they were amazing in their ability to take us across big sort of glacial lakes and stuff like that. But I also thought, this bit of equipment might work for flooded forest. If we do get into the thick of it, even though they're inflatable and everything in the Amazon has a spike on it, I thought, we can be very careful, kneel in the front of it, and if it gets above head high, I can literally kneel in the front of the craft and chop with a machete and continue that way. And I think those two things, the ability to cross rivers without building a raft and that data from NASA, they were what gave me the confidence to think that everyone else was wrong, and I was right, I suppose.
One of the things I heard you speak about before, and I was massively impressed with, was your dedication to being absolutely certain that when you got to the end, spoiler alert, you managed to get to the end, that no one could ever criticize you for not having walked all of it. I think there was one part of the story where you'd had to cross a river, but then you walked back quite a number of days to ensure that you hadn't cut anything out.
Well, it wasn't just one time. It was every single time. It originated because the walking partner that I ended up being the most consistent was called Cho, and he was a Peruvian, and he only intended to walk for 5 days, but he ended up walking for 2 years of his life with me, and he became such a good friend. But we would walk together, but he wasn't indigenous Cho. He was actually sort of African Peruvian descent, and he and I would often walk with local indigenous guys as well, because they would know the forest around their community better. And we started walking with this couple of guys who were brothers, actually, and they were the Dongo brothers. And we had two of these inflatable pack rafts, and they very quick. The Dongo brothers were in one, and Joe and I were in the other, and they worked out very quickly. They didn't paddle very fast, they could see that they were just drifting downriver, and essentially the further they drift downriver, the less walking they had to do. So at lunchtime, I said, look, guys, you can't do this. This expedition is called Walking the Amazon. We need to walk rather than drift down the river. And they sort of nodded and pretended that they knew what I was talking about. And then in the afternoon, they did exactly the same again. And I reckon by the end of the day, we'd probably drifted down the river about 7 kilometers. And I was getting really stressed about this. And I said to Cho at the end of the day, we can't let this happen again. This is, we're cheating people because we're saying we're walking the Amazon, and we've drifted downriver, probably over 10 kilometers by the end of the day. And Cho said, no, it's not that we can't let it happen again, Ed. We need to go back and do the whole day again. And immediately he said it, like the stress in my shoulders just evaporated, and I smiled and I went, do you know what? You're absolutely right. We do. And, it took us a couple of days to even source an outboard motor that would take us back upriver. And we lost maybe the best part of a week, and obviously the money cost of that as well. But it meant that we hadn't advanced at all by floating downriver, and we could start again with a clean conscience. And then we made that into a rule that whenever we crossed a river for the entire rest of the duration of the expedition, that we would walk back to perpendicular to where we embarked from on one bank, and we'd make sure it was directly across from the other. And initially that meant walking back sort of 80 meters or so, but by the time we crossed the Amazon, the very last time near the mouth, and we had to sleep on an island in the middle because it was so wide by that point. We had to walk back for 10 days, basically, to get to the perpendicular to where we set off, because that was how much the river had taken us down. So it was 10 days extra walking. But I just thought, you know what? If you're going to do this, you've got to do it correctly. And I wanted to get a Guinness Book of Records. I wanted to get a Guinness record. And I knew that if I was absolutely meticulous about how I was conducting it, then that was far more likely. So it did seem a complete and utter madness at the time because we were walking backwards. But it was necessary to do what we were claiming that we wanted to do. Yeah.
Just out of interest, how much did your pack rafts weigh? Because every
pack
ounce
rafts are about 1.5 kilos, I think.
Okay, so not as...
we had 2 4-piece carbon fiber split paddles. So the sort of double-ended normal kayak paddles split down into 4 pieces and fitted quite snugly on the side of the rucksacks when we were walking, and the actual raft itself packed down. I mean, it looked about the size of a conventional old school roll mat or thermarest, and took up no more space, and it weighed, I think it was about 1.5 kilos, but it gave us such versatility, I suppose. I originally planned the expedition thinking we were going to have to build rafts when we got to rivers, but I didn't know. I didn't know how many bloody rivers there were in the Amazon. There's quite a lot, and so I think those bits of kit were incredible. Although things evolve. I mean, there were certainly chunks of the expedition when maybe you might say that Joe and I got a bit blasé, but we were so bored of inflating the pack rafts that we would just walk straight into the rivers. And because we'd got these canoe bags, the waterproof canoe bags inside the rucksack, they acted as sort of flotation devices, and we didn't even take the rucksacks off. We'd just walk into the river and then make sure all the straps were tight on the shoulders and on the waist belt, and we'd do this weird little sort of almost like when you're treading water, except we were sort of swimming forward with our arms, and just because if the river was, I don't know, if we could do that in 3 minutes or so, rather than stop, take the pack off, take the boat out, inflate it, and then deflate it on the other side, it would save us quite a lot of time. And often when there were high concentrations of caiman, the alligators that are in the Amazon, we would sing as loud as we could because we were a bit nervous that, as our legs are thrashing under the water, that we were setting targets for caiman. But luckily we never got taken.
Did you get bitten by anything out there?
Nothing too serious. The amount of close encounters with snakes was ridiculous. I mean, sometimes we were coming across 6, 7, 8 snakes a day, and multiply that by 860 days. Although sometimes we didn't see a snake for a couple of weeks. There was encounters with anaconda, many encounters with vipers. We were really lucky, I think, in so many respects. We could hear jaguars sometimes when we were sleeping in our hammocks at night, but we never actually saw one. I think, I mean, mosquitoes, yes, about 50,000
Yeah.
bites. Scorpions, yes, I would estimate 50 times I got stung by scorpions, because again, they sort of locate themselves on the underside of leaves, and you just walk past and they got this sort of radiating pain that goes up your arm, and you go, oh, Christ, I've been hit by a scorpion again. But about the same as not that this probably helps for those who haven't been stung by bullet ants, but yeah, about the same as a bullet ant, I would say. And then bees and wasps were one of the big things, because again, their nests are on the underside of leaves and therefore quite hidden. And we go through one of those with a machete, and suddenly the person at the front gets stung about 20 or 30 times by bees. And the one behind is just laughing because it just became funny after a while. Not for the person at front, it never became funny.
I guess it has to become funny, otherwise you would just despair.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember I grew up, because my first experience with jungle expeditions was in Belize, and they had at the time there was this sort of quite serious threat of Africanized killer bees, and there'd been this strain of killer bee that had escaped and that was prevalent in Central America at the time, and they were actually aggressive bees that could kill you, and so we'd got these sort of actions on if we got attacked by killer bees, that we'd run into the bushes and that we'd lie face down and we'd keep our rucksack on to protect our back from stings, and that we'd put our hands over our nose and mouth and throat so that we didn't, go into anaphylactic shock, et cetera, and so we went from being super hyper vigilant to just thinking it was hilarious, and clearly, well, we didn't come across any Africanized killer bees. They stung and they hurt, but once they'd happened a few times, you just ended up going, thank God that's not me, and then after that, just thinking it's hilarious. So yeah, I suppose you had to draw some humour from somewhere, really.
A lot of people would think that it would be the physical challenge of a task like walking the Amazon that would be the big thing you had to overcome. But I've heard you talk before about the mental aspect of it and what a big role that played. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think people will find it fascinating, that balance between the physical challenge and then the mental challenge that goes along with that.
Okay, well, I mean, I've never hidden the fact that I didn't do any sort of mental preparation. I didn't know anything about psychology really before I went, and I suppose as a very crude but quite typical ex-British Army officer, if I had stresses and strains, I would have a beer in the evening, and I'd probably drank quite a lot when I was in the military. And when you're in the jungle, obviously there's no option to have a beer, but you still have the same stresses and strains, and they seemed to build, because there wasn't many people to talk to. If you get annoyed about something, it can stay in your brain all day long. And what I eventually found is that for some reason my predominant mood was negative. I was getting quite angry. The most minor thing would happen, like Cho would be 2 minutes late packing his rucksack in the morning, and I would we say would leave at 7 o'clock, and he's not ready till 2 minutes past 7, which, let's face it, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter when you're walking for 2.5 years. But I would get really angry. I'd get fuming at him, because he was, in my head, costing us time. And I was so obsessed in getting to the end that anything that got in the way would upset me. And so I think I was quite unpleasant to walk with for a while because I'd got things out of perspective. And I remember I had a lovely lady who did all my publicity for free because she just liked what the expedition and what I was doing. And she had another client who was a neuro-linguistic programming expert, and she said, look, I can tell by your emails, by your blogs, that you're struggling. If you want to have a chat with this guy, this is his number. So I called him up from the middle of the rainforest, and I think we had about 3 half-hour conversations in the end, but he just was able to say to me, look, that you've been away from home for at this point about 1.5 years. You've been cut off from all the people that you love, and he just tried to put in place a few things that would help me regain perspective. I was so determined to get to the end that it had become obsessive, and that anything that got in the way became the sort of focus of my anger. And so he would one of the little trips, and he gave me loads of little tips and tricks, but it was to envisage, when I could feel myself getting into one of these sort of negative spirals, envisage somebody in my life who was really inspirational to me. And my first sergeant major when I joined the military was a guy called Mark Hale, and he was a really big guy, rugby player. He was devout Christian. He was doing an MSc in psychology, so he wasn't, your typical meathead squaddy. He was a really inspiring guy, and I would envisage him, and I really looked up to him. And when I was going into one of these negative things, I would imagine that he was there, and sort of looking at me with a bemused smile on his face, going, "Mr. Stafford, what are you doing?" And it was just enough for me to see the madness in it, and see that I wouldn't act like that in front of Mark. I was almost having this little indulgent little strop, really. Wouldn't act like that in front of anyone, really. And so it gave me a little bit more perspective in order to realize how I was behaving, and then sort of step outside of it before it took hold, I suppose. And it's basic stuff, real layman layman methods of sort of managing your brain, but I'd never done any of that sort of psychological management before. I just thought, if you're angry, you're angry, or if you're upset, you're upset. But to be able to recognize thoughts and emotions as they come in before they set hold, because as I said, you sort of propagate these things in your own brain, and one tiny little niggle can become huge in a matter of hours, because you've been thinking about it non-stop because there's no other stimulation. So yeah, no, it was definitely part of the expedition that it was the part of the expedition that I struggled with the most, was staying positive. And yet I think if I'd got the skills that I've got now, like I meditate in modern day life, because I think it's quite good to have a little bit of perspective on your own thoughts and emotions, and to believe that you are every single thought that comes into your head is actually a path to madness, I think, because we all have thoughts that are involuntary and just pop up into our head, and just to have a little bit of distance to be able to sort of view them and go, do you know what, I don't have to engage in that. I think it gives me massive freedom, certainly for doing the current adventures that I do, and in everyday life, just in terms of, running a household and being a good husband and being a good dad, not just getting caught up in things, being able to step back, having some perspective gives you proper choice and a bit more sort of emotional balance, I think. But yeah, that was definitely one of the biggest learning things, I think, from walking the Amazon in general.
I'd encourage anyone listening to this to go and find the documentary that you made about it. And that kind of brings me to one of the last questions about that particular adventure, which was that you did actually film the whole thing, which we're both filmmakers, and I find that incredible, that even despite all the kind of the stress and strain of completing this incredible feat, you were also documenting the whole thing online and video, which was then made into a documentary.
We know how difficult it is when you're going and there's only two of you, but doing it by yourself, we appreciate how hard it is, but then doing it with all the extra stress that you're putting on the kit, like a 2-year-long trip with the moisture and everything like that, it must be tough.
Well, I mean, I appreciate I appreciate that, but I mean, it did make it harder. I'm not happy with how I filmed it, though. I mean, certainly looking back at it from having made, I think 6 or 7 self-filmed series now for Discovery, but my dogs have...
That's okay. We normally have one running around the office as well, pulling cables out.
Basically, I did miss a number of very, very key moments when we were held up at Arrow Point by indigenous Indians. I was too scared to get the camera out. When I had shotguns pointed in my chest by drugs traffickers, same deal. So, there were some TV gold moments where the camera was packed in my bag and turned off, and I cursed myself for that, which is why actually I'm happier with the book than I am with the documentary, because the documentary sort of skims the surface in terms of the real dangerous bits. But I think it was, for me, it was a foot in the door, because I as much as I'd love to say it was a romantic notion just to walk the length of the Amazon, and I had no intention of creating anything from it. That's not the case. I had a sort of strategy. I thought if I do an expedition like this that no one's done before and I film it, there is a likelihood that I'll be able to get it on TV if it gets enough sort of media attention, which again it did at the end of the expedition. So it was a strategy. I really wanted to. There's a guy called Bruce Parry who did a lot of tribe stuff for the BBC when I was getting first into expeditions, and I'd spent some time with him doing gap year expeditions, and he'd gone off and done this amazing trip across West Papua, and it made a TV documentary called Cannibals and Crampons, and that led him into doing tribe TV with the BBC. And I used that as a model, really, and I thought, you know what, this is an area where I want to go into. I still to this day find creating, telling a story through a camera, through a video camera, is such a nice device. I love it. I love thinking about all the shots. I love thinking about how the way I'm going to shoot it. And so, actually, although it was more work, it gave me another thing to keep me sane. Actually, the creative side meant that it wasn't just a physical slog, and it wasn't just being bitten by mosquitoes. I was actually thinking, do you know what? This is beautiful as well. I need to capture this bit. Or, you know, if I went and put a camera on that bit of hard ground, I could capture myself walking through this flooded forest or whatever. And I think, in a way, it's nice to have a sort of sub-project that you can focus on in order to, in order to stop thinking about the fact that your shoulders hurt and your feet hurt, really.
Having successfully completed it,
yeah.
What was the kind of fallout like after that, getting back to normality, kind of civilization, relatively speaking, and then the next steps? Because you've had a number, you've mentioned already, but you've had a number of very successful and very entertaining series after, which I'm guessing spawned off the back of it, as was your master plan.
Well, it was part of the plan, yes. It came back to an incredibly positive response. The PR lady that I mentioned before, she was called Vicky Rimmer, but she was utterly amazing. We did you can work out from the amount of column inches how much to pay for that a level of publicity would actually cost, and it came to about £25 million
Wow.
worth of publicity that was created. I mean, we were on CNN International for 10 days in a row at the end of the expedition, broadcasting live interviews from the satellite internet link in my rucksack. And, you know, to be on CNN International, which goes out to about 230 international territories for one day, is good enough. But to have that in 10 days sequentially was just extraordinary. She did an amazing job as on the front page of the New York Times, the front page of the Times in the UK, the iPad version anyway. But, you know, it was extraordinary. And so as a result, came back to this real sort of wave of positivity, which was wonderful. And it was just, you know, I was so relieved to be home, but I was also, you know, really chuffed that people seem to care, I suppose. People seem to be quite engaged with it. So it did lead into clearly Discovery Channel then commissioned it off post expedition. It got made into a documentary, and lots of people watched it, which was great. So it led into then me doing more TV, and then they said to me, "What do you think you want to do next?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to do another 2.5 years walking through a rainforest, so it needs to be a lot shorter." And they said the problem with you only, because I said I'd give them 2 months, and they said the problem with that is that it's not going to seem as impressive as your 2.5 year walk down the Amazon. What could you do in 2 months that is that impressive? And I said, well, it's only not that impressive if I've got the same amount of stuff. So why don't you take away from me, you know, my rucksack and my hammock and my tent, and then eventually it was decided, like, if you stripped away everything, so if I was to have no food, no water, no knife, no equipment of any sort to survive, no clothes, and dropped on a desert island, you know, would I be able to survive? Could I make it with just my bare hands and half a brain? And the honest answer was I didn't know, because I was an ex-military guy who wasn't really a survival expert. I was an expedition leader, and I genuinely didn't know if they dropped me on an island for 2 months if I could sort of do the whole Robinson Crusoe thing and survive. And so they said, brilliant. Well, if you don't know, that's going to make even better TV. So that's how it started. And I did a 60-day thing on an island between Fiji and Tonga. And quite frankly, I really, really struggled. Again, mentally mostly. But, you know, even getting a fire going with 2 sticks took me 13 days on the island. And eventually I did it and got to the end. And again, that did really, really, really well in terms of ratings on Discovery Channel. So it's led to one after another, and I just think it's a dream come true now. I think what was probably quite a chest-beating ego reason for walking the Amazon has developed into something quite a lot more wholesome. You know, I'm married now and I've got a kid, and you know, to go away and do these fun trips, but actually in order to bring home enough money to pay the mortgage at the end of the month. Somehow, and also to put myself through these challenges rather than, it being all about shouting, look at me, look how tough I am. I look at it more as, it's good to keep being challenged. It's good to keep being humbled by situations where you don't necessarily have all the right answers and have to therefore think outside the box and come up with new solutions. So it's a sort of a way of staying mentally young and evolving from a personal perspective, or rather than stagnating, I suppose. So yeah, it's one thing's led to another, and I'm extraordinarily lucky to be in the position I am. It's 10 years ago since I walked the Amazon. Or 10 years ago today, I was walking the Amazon, but equally 10 years ago in a year's time, I'll still be walking the Amazon. So it's a bit of a folly, but it was a while ago. But luckily the sort of positivity that it created still sort of lives on, amazingly.
Now, one of my favorite series that you've actually done so far is the one where you basically pick points on Google Maps. And you were like, I'm going to go and find out what's there. Did you come up with that concept?
I didn't. It was a company called Keo Films. Well, in fact, the concept evolved and had been pitched a couple of times to them before in different guises. It was called Unmapped at one stage. It was called Trailblazer at one stage. And the final name for the series was Into the Unknown. But it was probably one of the most fun to film. Literally just picking something bizarre that you can see on Google Earth or Google Maps, and just packing a rucksack and booking a flight and going and finding out what it was. And it was quite investigative, and it meant meeting lots of people and asking for favors and hitching rides on lorries and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, it was a really good fun thing to film. Unfortunately, although it did really well in the UK, in certain territories internationally, it didn't do well. And then they rank things from A to F on Discovery Channel. And I think it was a B in the UK, but it got an F in Norway, for example. So, and you have to have a certain level of consistency for a series to get recommissioned. So, unfortunately, it didn't tick enough boxes, so it didn't get recommissioned. But it was a really, really good fun one to film. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a shame, actually. Of all the different investigations you did, what was the one that surprised you the most?
I think the one to West Papua, actually. There was an island on the south of West Papua. I can't even remember what it's called to this day, but there was these parallel lines that appeared to be right in the middle of a swamp, and they appeared to be man-made, and yet there seemed to be no reason why there would be sort of man-made parallel lines down there. And I sort of postulated that it might be some sort of open-cast mining, but I really didn't have a clue. And the journey itself, just getting there, was mental. It was having to hitch rides on motorbikes that were sort of going through these incredibly muddy tracks through the rainforest and then down beaches and stuff, and eventually got to this area and started talking to this tribe, and it sort of dawned on me what was going on as I was sitting there talking to them, because they were living on these islands in the middle of a swamp, but the swamp didn't have any islands. Certainly not on my way in. It had just been this endless sort of grassy swamp, basically. And then I got to the centre, and there were these little islands that the people were living on, and then they went everywhere by boat. And it was only going off, and I did a little video diary the first night that I got there, and I looked around me, and there were these sort of wooden stakes all around the island, and I thought, they must have put those in to protect the shores from erosion. And then I realised that they weren't there to protect the shores of the island from erosion. They were stakes that had been put in order to create the island. So they'd basically put this ring of stakes in, and then they grabbed all the grass and vegetation from the outside and the reeds and stuff, dumped it in the middle, and created islands for themselves. And they'd actually sort of built a home up and out of the swamp. And so these parallel lines were the agricultural version of that. They were huge agricultural farming strips, basically, that they'd again built up out of the swamp in order to create a life. And it sort of ended up being this fascinating story that they were a very peaceful tribe, and they'd got fed up of the inter-tribal fighting in West Papua, and they'd escaped down to this swamp, which everyone else in West Papua thought was uninhabitable, and they'd basically built their own land up and out of the swamp, which was, one of the most sort of fascinating sort of outcomes of an anomaly that you could see on Google Earth than I could possibly imagine, really, because it ended up telling a whole story of this fascination but really, really peaceful people. So yeah, that was probably the one that sticks in my mind the most.
I have to say, for me, that was also the episode. That was what I had in mind when I asked you the question.
Good, I answered the right way then.
Now, like I said at the start, modern day kind of explorers and adventurers like yourself and Sean Conway, who's been on this podcast as well.
Has he?
A lot of people, I think, take a lot of inspiration, maybe not to go and do something quite as grand as what you guys have done, but in a small way in their own lives. And you've just released a book, Adventures for a Lifetime, which has a vast array of different adventures, big and small. And one of the things I loved about this is
all around the globe.
Yeah, all around the globe. There's a couple from our home country up here in Scotland, but some of the adventures in there are very achievable for most people. And I really liked that aspect of it, where it hadn't just simply focused on the most grand expeditions there were. Tell me about why you came up with the book and put pen to paper to put this together.
Yeah, sure. Well, mainly because I haven't done anything book-worthy for the last few years, and so I had to come up with some idea in order to cobble together a book. No, the real reason is I became a dad about 17 months ago, and it shifted me, actually, to a place of thinking, do you know what I've achieved is great, and it does pay the bills, and I enjoy going and having all these adventures, but is there something that I can do with it? And I'd been an ambassador for the Scouts for quite a while, but I'd been quite quiet. And I thought, you know what? There is so much that I've learned, and there is so much that I've got to be grateful for the way I've developed as a person by having all these adventures. And so I think if there is one thing that I can now do with it all, it's encourage that in a lot of other people. So I've now become a patron of the Youth Adventure Trust, which again it's a bit like the Scouts, but it's for less fortunate, more vulnerable people, and that might not have enough confidence, for example, to go in and join the Scouts. And so it is part of my sort of way. It just ends up being what I focus on at the moment is encouraging other people to get out and have adventures. And it needed the top line big expeditions in order to be sort of inspiring as a top level. But I also didn't want to make it, I didn't want everything to be a 2.5-year walk in the Amazon or a walk across Antarctica, because I wanted it to not put people off, I suppose, in the size and scale of expeditions. So it was deliberately all different. The book was definitely written with all different abilities and levels of experience in mind. But I don't think I'm really expecting anyone to copy any of the trips exactly as I've written them. But it was definitely a text that I wanted to get people inspired by, to think, do you know what, crikey, if I did pick 2 points on a map in the Brazilian rainforest and they were, say, 50 miles apart or something, could I plan an expedition to fly into the country, hire a local guy with a boat, take me upriver to one of these points, and then get out of the boat with enough supplies to last me 2 weeks or whatever, and a lighter, and just walk through the rainforest on a compass bearing until I get to another point, which you can almost guarantee that those 2 points have never been walked in the Amazon before. And you could actually get an expedition off the ground to do something that no one's ever done before, because there's so much that is out there that is unexplored, and they're not trips that you could go into Thomas Cook and book off the shelf. I genuinely, I'm not really a fan of, even if you go to the coolest places on earth, if you go on a cruise to Antarctica, it can be the least adventurous thing possible, because everything's done to you. And you step off onto the ice, and you've got dinner served to you or whatever amongst the penguins, and it's sort of opulence. In a way, it revolts me, some of the amount of money that's spent on travel, but it's done in such a way that rubs me up the wrong way anyway. And I think, the scale is irrelevant, but doing it yourself, coming up with ideas yourself, thinking ones that scare you a little bit as well, thinking, wow, if I actually could I pull that together? Would I have to go and learn Portuguese, for example, in my Brazilian example? Maybe I'd have to learn how to navigate. I'd have to go to, the mountaineering school in Platy Brennan and take a 5-day course so that my navigation skills were. But, if I did all the proper preparation and saved up enough money, could I get something off the ground like that myself? And I think invariably that's a massive learning process and growing process in itself, just pulling the whole thing together. And then when you get there, invariably everything goes wrong, and then you're having to think on your feet, and a guide will get drunk and steal your money or something, and you'll have to get out of that situation. But suddenly you've got excitement, and you're having to use all of the things that we don't use, the parts of your brain where you're having to think outside the box and deal with some angry, drunk Brazilian that you wouldn't have to do if you're getting on the tube and going to work every day. So it's having adventures and sort of dragging yourself into a world of adventure, kicking and screaming for really positive, wholesome reasons. It's not a book for adrenaline junkies. It's not just to jump off big buildings and go woohoo and have loads of adrenaline pumped through your system. Some of them will cause adrenaline to be pumped through your system, but I really believe in it as a way of sort of personal development in becoming almost the best version of yourself, I suppose. So yeah, that's in a very long-winded way. That's why I wrote it. Yeah.
Well, no, I think it will certainly. I think it will certainly do that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's nothing worse than going to a place and playing the role of the tourist. Because you never really have a story to tell at the end of it, but the way that you describe it, you certainly do. Yeah,
and I think exactly. You're treated differently, aren't you? And it's actually why I think the job that I do, where I'm going to make TV programs, is such a nice one, because I get to go to places that I've never been before, but I've got a job to do when I get there. And I think Trek Forest, the expedition charity that I used to work for, was great because again you go to parts of the rainforest which are extraordinary, but you're not doing it just for your own enjoyment. You're doing it to get a job done, and you're doing it to help people. And I think for me, that then the contacts that you do make in country are so much more meaningful, because you're working alongside somebody and you're having to overcome all sorts of cultural differences in order to achieve something. And I think that, again, it just puts a different energy on the whole thing, and you're not just there to make yourself happy or have this really personal, I don't know, and yet quite selfish experience of, this is when I had a glass of champagne on the top of this mountain that was brought up for me by a porter that I didn't bloody carry. You get the point.
Yeah. In the book, obviously, there's a huge spectrum of things from the Isles. In fact, I was on Skye last week in a hotel room reading the section about Skye, looking at the Coolin Mountains. It was quite funny because at the same time, because we do a lot of work on the West Coast.
Okay.
But what made you decide particular ones? I think there's obviously ones there where the kayak and canoeing down the Amazon, because your wife was involved in that one. But what made you pick certain other ones?
That maybe you, because I'm guessing that you probably didn't do all of them.
No, and it does state very clearly at the beginning. I did an interview on, what was it, 5 Live last week, and the lady was so crestfallen when I said that I hadn't done them all. I obviously haven't made it clear enough that this isn't my sort of autobiography of adventure at all. I just wanted to there were 2 different breadths of sort of variation that I wanted to achieve. One was at sort of entry level. I wanted to have stuff that you could do with zero experience and just go out and walk. But equally, I wanted to have stuff that was from all sorts of different genres of exploration, from scuba diving to walking to long distance cycling, and I think that was really important, because it doesn't matter what format adventure comes in, and it doesn't matter at what level, because it's all relevant to you, isn't it? If my sister, for example, was to I don't know, go camping in France, that would be extraordinarily adventurous for her, because she doesn't do that sort of thing, and that's not her type of thing. So I genuinely think it's creating an environment which does slightly push you out your comfort zone. That is what I was trying to do. So yes, like Lewis Pugh and his ice swimming and stuff. He's just somebody who's caught my attention. Who, I don't know him, but he's somebody that's caught my attention that I'm that I'm impressed by. And again, I probably, if I'd written the whole thing a few months later, Swimming Around Britain would have been one, and Ross Edgley would have been in the book, because again, it's just picking on stuff that makes me smile and go, wow, this guy is nuts, but in a really good way, I suppose. Yeah.
But potential for volume 2 then.
Definitely a potential for volume 2. Yeah, that's nice of you to sort of slip that in. If HarperCollins is listening, then
we got the book as I think before it hit the shops.
Your publisher was very kind.
Your publisher was very good.
Ago.
So is it actually out yet?
Yeah, no, it is out. It came out on October the 4th, I think. So yeah, no, it's had a really nice. It's been received really, really well. Actually, everyone's been very complimentary about it, and I was worried because it's the first time I've written something that isn't about my own adventures or my own mental struggle, or and to that extent, it was quite refreshing to write in many ways, because it was a new challenge for me. I was having to write about subjects that were new to me as well. But I suppose with the sort of background experience of sort of feeling like a sort of generic adventurer anyway. So yeah, no, it was lovely to write, and I'm quite relieved that it's gone down one as well.
I noticed it is also on audiobook. I was looking yesterday, and it's out now on audiobook. I did notice
the problem with doing an audiobook is that all of the typos that you missed when you proofread it, you suddenly see, and you're like, oh, bloody hell, how did that one get through? I can't believe I let that get through. But
I did notice as well that your Walking the Amazon is on audiobook as well, but only in German.
No, is it?
Yes, I promise you, it's on Audible on Amazon, and it's only in German, and there was a lot of negative reviews, and I was interested to see why they were negative, and it was all negative reviews because it was English native
saying we want it in English.
Saying we want it in English. So I think you might need to sort that out.
Oh, really? Is that on Audible?
On Audible, yeah.
There's a demand.
There's a demand.
Well, and I've contacted them, and they said there isn't enough demand, and that I would have to pay for it myself if I wanted to do an audiobook. So,
well, maybe you should point that out to them.
All right, I will. I'd love to do it, actually, because that is still the one I'm I suppose the most proud of. So yeah, I'd like to do the audiobook of that.
Well, it was an amazing launch platform for your career, certainly.
It was.
Ed, just as we get to wrap up, I'd happily talk to you for hours about this, but I know that we have to pretty much wrap up now. And we asked podcast listeners for questions, and we've selected one of them. So this comes from a podcast listener from last week, and it's from Paul Wilkie, and he is asking how on the sort of, I guess this is going to be kind of irrelevant for sort of naked and when you're naked and marooned, but how do you maintain a decent diet when you're on long expeditions, or is that something that's actually possible?
Again, I suppose I've come full circle. Really, the Amazon my diet was terrible. Certainly, when I went through Peru, we were every single little tiny shop we were buying cheap processed biscuits and fizzy pop, and and I was, even when I was going into shops to buy provisions for long distances, the amount of sugar that I actually thought that I needed was horrendous. And so we were going for, at one point when there was about 4 of us walking, we were going for 1.5 kilos of sugar a day. The survival stuff's a bit different because clearly I have to just eat whatever's on offer, and that I invariably always end up losing weight on those. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, we often overindulge a little bit too much on the eating front, don't we? So I come back at what I sort of view to be my sort of more my fighting weight. So that's just whatever I can shove in my mouth, really. And on expeditions now, if I was to go on trips now, I don't think I need as much as I used to think that I did. But there's some amazing new, they're not freeze-dried, they're dehydrated foods, and there's quite a big difference. Like, I think it's Firepot make them, is a really nice company that make them. So there's meals that are actual meals that are then dehydrated and then popped in bags, and I think the shelf life's a bit less. It's 2 years rather than about 10 years, but it's real food, and I'd often go for stuff like that. And if I was sourcing it in-country, I'd just go for cheap staples that you can knock up. I'd still go for things like rice and beans and things that you can cook in the field that are quite lightweight, avoiding. I think I struggle taking big tins of stuff. I think that's all a bit heavy, but dry stuff that can then be complemented as you go with fish, fresh fish that you catch in rivers locally. That's quite nice. But to have a sort of staple that will keep you going is a good thing. Yeah.
Has the way that you've had to source food on expeditions and on your TV programs changed your kind of appreciation for food when you come home?
Well, I think it's probably not revealing too much to say that certainly after the 60 days, I developed a pretty close to sort of problem issues with food. I became really obsessive. I was waking up in the middle of the night and going to the fridge and eating huge amounts of food to the point where I was absolutely bloated, because I think when you don't have enough food, it's very, very difficult to not obsess about it. And so came back with a pretty unhealthy with a pretty unhealthy outlook on food. I think nowadays it's all come back into line, really. I just try and eat healthily, really. I have had periods of my life where I've tried to be paleo or tried to follow a ketotic diet or various different evolutions of that I suppose really based from paleo. But I kind of feel like when I try too hard and then when I try and be too strict on myself, I end up removing stuff that is just nice to eat, like your carbohydrates and sweets and stuff, and then end up having a little binge every now and again. So I actually think, do you know what? If I'm just relaxed about it and I eat reasonably healthy food, then that's a better state to be, really. And I think that applies on expedition and in real life, really. Yeah.
Well, Ed, thank you very much for joining us today on the podcast. It's been fascinating to speak to you. We've both really enjoyed your book, as we've already said. I encourage people to go and check it out. And if I find it hard, I would find it hard to believe that most people listen to this podcast don't already know who you are and haven't watched a lot of your programs already. But if they haven't, I encourage them to go back to your back catalogue and watch your adventures over the last 10 years now.
Thank you both very much. I hugely appreciate you doing the podcast. Thank you.
That's it for another week. Join us again. It won't be quite 2 weeks' time because we were a little bit late putting this out, but it will be almost in 2 weeks' time.
It is. We've got a whole heap of cool things coming up. We're going to another podcast about aquaculture and salmon and issues on the West Coast with Corin Smith. We've got one on renewables coming up. That was as a result of our shout out and talking about renewables. So
appreciate it to everyone that emailed in talking about renewables.
So we've got what should be a good podcast on that, I think. Coming up,
and we got the guys involved in Brother Film coming on. We're recording the show in a day's time once this goes out.
Yeah, if you don't know them, just to give you a bit of background before the podcast comes out, go and check out Brother Film. They make some incredible films. They've done a lot of stuff in F1 and for Red Bull. They do a lot of big film music festivals. Really cool company, and we've never actually spoken to the guys ourselves, so we're really looking forward to getting them on the show.
We are indeed, and rugby season is also upon us. At the weekend, Scotland just played Wales.
Who won?
Wales trashed Scotland.
Oh dear, that's depressing. Is that why you were looking so miserable this morning?
South Africa played England, and there was a little bit of a controversial thing at the end. Yeah,
what happened?
A shoulder barge that could have changed the course of the game. But
oh dear,
I don't know. I think the English fans will say that it was fair. I don't know. It was. Let's put it this way. I've seen penalties given for less than what Owen Farrell did.
Good thing it wasn't really for anything, that game. That was just a friendly.
Yeah, not really. But I mean, the point is consistency.
True.
But anyway, it was still a good game. I really enjoyed and then I didn't watch the Italy-Ireland game, but I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I think the final score was like 56 or something. It was a complete decimation of Italy.
Was it not the first female referee of a major rugby game this weekend?
Possibly.
Maybe not. It might have been rugby league. Maybe it was in rugby league. Yeah.
It wasn't any of the two games that I saw anyway.
I heard something on the radio.
But the autumn tests are well and truly underway, and we've got Scotland playing Fiji, South Africa, and Argentina, and I don't know who. I'm not. I don't really. I follow the other teams, but not as closely. So I don't know who else everyone else is playing. But
well, by this weekend's performance, it sounds like it might be tough.
Well, I'm hoping they've just got it out their system. Yeah, but the thing is Scotland never really wins when they go down to Wales. They never win.
Yeah.
No. But then again, this is the first time Wales have won in like 16 years in their opening Test match. And
I don't think it's a very good excuse.
No,
they just need to play more consistently.
A lot of new players there. All the big boys are out right now.
Injured.
All injured, yep. Or not there.
Oh, well. And with that, I think we will leave you.
Yeah, we will. Remember, you can listen on loads of different platforms, Spotify being the one we're encouraging you to go on to right now. By the way, SoundCloud, we're not really using right now. We stopped paying the ridiculous fee for it, which was like £200 a year just to upload your track onto it, which, considering all the rest of them are free, is a ridiculous amount. So you're meant to be able to listen to the last 2 tracks we upload. It's not working right now.
Go on to YouTube if you're on a PC. If
yes,
you need to.
There's YouTube,
Spotify.
there's Spotify, which is free, by the way. You can sign up for the premium one, which I do actually have because the music's pretty good on it.
And when you listen to a podcast, there's not even any adverts,
there's no adverts.
even on the free one.
Yeah, so Spotify, iTunes, obviously the one that I think 90% of everyone uses, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. The list is endless. Just type in Podcast Into the Wilderness and you will find it. If you want to contact the show, it's podcast@paceproductionsuk.com. And on the social media, it is pace_brothers on Instagram, and it's Podcast Into the Wilderness on Facebook.
And just lastly, we mentioned this at the very start of the podcast, but a massive congratulations to Ross Edgley for completing his swim around the UK. What an incredible feat.
Yes,
so, round of applause to you.
And look painful. It looked painful, but incredible.
Yeah, mentally, I think there are very few people who can do that.
Incredible.
So congratulations to Ross, and you will hear from us in just under 2 weeks.